Hello everyone, it is time to tell you my top 10 favorite books of the year. This is my favorite video to film and also my favorite just to kind of think about all year as I'm reading what is going to rise to the top as being my top favorite book. What is going to make the cut, make the list. You know, there's times when you like find a book that you are absolutely so into that maybe you journal about for a long time just because it hits you some kind of way. But are you going to read books that like sit with you and stick with you even longer than that? Like, I don't know. And then I always get so excited too for January 1st. Like, well, what new books am I going to discover this upcoming year that either one, have not even been born yet, that don't even exist in the world yet, or that I just don't know about. And I am a massive mood reader, so I just kind of tend to follow a path and see where I end up. One thing I noticed about last year's books was in 2023, I slightly got into horror. I would say like a literary psychological horror situation is what a lot of my books were last year. And this year, it seems to be a lot of like ethical questions or still psychological. Yeah, I don't know. Kind of similar, but not as much horror. I would say just psychological in general is kind of where things went this year accidentally by me just mood reading and finding what I'm most interested in. So I do have my top 10. I'm going to go from number 10 all the way to number 1 being my top. Towards the bottom of the list, these could kind of be shuffled around in order, but the top is definitely my top for sure. And also a lot of these books just made me feel some kind of way. And so I might forget the names of the characters, or like I can't give you massive details about the plot, but something about them has stuck with me regardless. So starting with number 10, this is a book that I finished most recently and found it super interesting. I found this book from Mr. B's Emporium of Books or something like that in Bath. They have amazing social media accounts to follow if you want book recommendations, and that is The Mark. This is by an Icelandic author, and I am a huge fan of Icelandic books. I think everything I've read so far that's by an Icelandic author, I have absolutely loved. So this book is definitely in that psychological niche. It follows 4 different people over the course of, I don't know, a month, a few weeks, where basically in Iceland sometime in the future, they are basically trying to figure out a way to prevent crime, to stop it before it even happens. And they have created this empathy test that they feel if people pass the empathy test and are marked, they are safer individuals that are less likely to commit crimes. And all this is well and good. It starts off just as a voluntary test, but it kind of gains momentum and people want to take it because then they can move into apartment communities that are marked, or like gated home communities that are marked. And that means that everybody that is in there as a guest or as a resident has to be marked. They have to have passed this empathy test. People with low empathy, it's okay. We still accept them, but they have to have like therapy sessions on a regular basis. They need to be like healed. Their brain needs to be fixed, all this stuff. And there's this idea that they are a welcome part of society and it's not bad or good that they passed it. But obviously it is bad that they failed the test. Sorry, I think I said passed a second ago, but you guys know what I mean. And it just like creates this like momentum where people almost become forced to take the quiz. One example is one of the characters, his mom wants to move to a safer community, so she does. Now she's in a marked place. He has ethical reasons for not wanting to take the test. Doesn't mean he's going to pass or fail. Like, that part doesn't matter to him. He just is ethically opposed to it. And so because she moves to this marked community and he is not marked because he has never taken the test, he no longer sees her. They like cut ties. And so it's just like there's so many discussions you can have with this book and so many ethical nuances and like, oh, I could see that if this happened, it would go in this kind of way, or like I see that this could be a negative implication of this and all this stuff. And basically, I didn't even say what the book is about, which is basically that Iceland is about to vote on if they want to make this test mandatory or not. So that is kind of like what is lurking in the background throughout the book as you explore all these nuances and all these different people's experiences. Really, really interesting, and again, psychological, like I absolutely love. So number 9 also is a bit on the psychological side, and I don't really remember the character names besides Mrs. Wood, who is in the title. This is The Other Side of Mrs. Wood. It's by Lucy Barker. It is a bit of a gothic, unsettling sort of situation. Basically, from my memory, there is this woman that is like a psychic and does seances. And she feels like this girl is like following her, or like she sees this presence with her a lot. And they finally meet. It is not a vision. It is actually a real person. And basically what this person wants is she wants to be trained. She wants to also be a psychic. That is her dream. And so the two women like come together, and one is kind of tutoring the other. And yeah, crazy things happen. But what is crazier, even though I love the story, is at the very end, I found out this is actually based on a true relationship between two women who were psychics, like probably in the 1800s or something. So don't look up the story about them ahead of time. Like, just read the book, and then if you're curious and interested, you can look up the story of the two actual women. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. I really liked it. We have a book that is very similar to The Mark, now that I think of it. So it's interesting that I loved it as well. I did a massively long video on this book and had a massive number of conversations with Sarah, because her and Hannah read this for the book club they're in, and that is Q. So Q is slightly similar to The Mark, where there's also a test that everyone has to take in school. And it's not an empathy test, though. It's an IQ test. And you don't get an ordinary IQ score like we have, with like 90 to 110 being in the average range, 85 to 115 being one standard deviation away from the mean, but they give them like different values. So I think they're like more like single digit values. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, right? The point is that, all these kids are taking an IQ test, and the IQ test really determines like what type of schooling they're going to have access to, and it determines like what people think of them, and it determines like all this stuff. And I just connected to it so much as an educator, all the nuances of, you know, a decision like this, again, ethical situations. And I did not know my IQ when I read this, since I have found out my IQ, which I think could make it more of an interesting question. But anyway, yeah, I just found this super, super interesting. In the United States, the only time you would have your IQ tested is if you were in special education. Otherwise, you would not get your IQ tested in school. Or in my case, I got tested for my recent testing that I told you about. So anyway, yeah, just loads of interesting perspectives on what education would look like if you had an IQ of something versus the other. If it was public, which is kind of the same as this, like, is it public information or private information? And how does it impact you if your IQ is published, or if your pass or fail test is published? Yeah, loads of really interesting ethical, psychological situations. So apparently this is my vibe. If you have any other books that you feel like fit this kind of vibe, maybe I'll enjoy them for 2025, or maybe I'll have a different vibe. I don't know. I've only read one book so far. Okay, the next book. I really want you to walk into knowing nothing, okay? It's a children's book, and it is called The Probability of Everything. This is by Sarah Everett. I don't think I've been saying the author's names. So sorry. This book blew me absolutely away. I enjoyed it at first because it kind of had like a sci-fi vibe to it, but just lightly, which is, you know, what I prefer. basically this girl, what's her name? Kemi. She knows the world is going to end. There's an asteroid that is heading towards Earth. And the story starts off as like basically like, what would you do if you knew you only had a few days left on this Earth? Because the whole Earth was about to be destroyed. Then other stuff happened. And I remember I was listening to it on audio while I was cleaning the bathroom. And I got to this part and I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, what? What? And so, yeah, just read it, okay? Okay. Also, it's obviously a children's book. I would say it's good for, like, older kids, like maybe, like, 5th, 6th grade and up, because it deals with, like, Black Lives Matter situations. Hopefully that's not a spoiler. The next book I read is also psychological and about schools. It is just called Pet. I love this one so much, as with all of these, obviously. This one speaks of a girl who is in school and her teacher is just this lovely human being who has class pets and is just so sweet to certain people. And just like, or kind of mean actually to some of the other kids that aren't her pet. Anyway, it's kind of unsettling because it seems like she rotates through pets. So you are her pet and then you're kind of dropped and then there's a new pet, and you kind of discover this as the book goes on that like, she seems nice, but is she really? Anyway, the whole thing about the main character is that her mom has recently died and she has this pen that's like basically the only thing she has of her mom or something special that she has left of her mom. It is, I think it's on the cover. It's this pen that has like a floaty cruise ship in it. I feel like these are common tourist items. Anyway, one day her pen is just missing, and it seems that there is a thief in their classroom that's stealing things from the kids, and it's just this whole mystery of like trying to figure out who is taking the items, but it's also like literary, because you're diving deep into like the character's psyche and stuff like that, and it's really well written. And then there's obviously like all the psychological stuff of like, what the F is wrong with this teacher? Like, why does she have all these like kids that she puts on pedestals and then she just drops them? Like, that doesn't seem very emotionally healthy. So yeah, I loved it. I loved it so much. And then obviously like, that's a bit ominous, wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you say? Okay, in the top 5, number 6 is The Safe Keep. This is the UK cover and I love it so much. I love that you can see down the hallway and then there's just this creepy girl sitting there. This is slightly unsettling as well. Basically, there's this woman that lives in her family's home and she is very weird and very protective over everything in the house. She's constantly convinced people are stealing from her. A bit like this. Anyway, she goes to dinner with her siblings. I think she has 2 brothers, if I remember correctly. And she's just kind of grumpy because one of them, she knows he's gonna bring a girl. He always has a different girl, and he never says that a girl is coming, but he always brings a girl. So she's just kind of annoyed, and I honestly would be the same way. Like, just tell me you're gonna bring someone, right? Then I will change the number for the reservation to include this person. But he never does. But at the same time, she knows he's gonna bring someone, so she should just, you know, adapt for that and add an extra person to the reservation. But it just like, it's this thing that just bothers her, right? And he's always late. Okay, so finally he arrives at dinner. Yes, he brings a girl. She hates this girl. This girl seems really nice, really friendly, lovely, but our main character is a bit grumpy and a bit of a snot, and yeah, not a fan. Anyway, it quickly happens through a weird turn of events that the girlfriend and the main character end up living together in this house that this girl is super protective over everything in there, always thinking that people are stealing from her. And so it is just very tense because of this. It also journeys into sapphic territory. So there's that. And then something else happens, which I should have seen coming, but I did not. And I loved it so much. It was amazing. Okay, one of my, you know it's one of my favorites of the year, but like for real. Then there's a book that I read like twice in 1 week. And that is Every Heart, a Doorway. This is fantasy. I don't read loads of fantasy. This is by Shannon McGuire. And this is basically, I think I felt connected to this because it deals a lot with trauma. Basically, what happens in this story or in this world is that it is not really all that uncommon for, from time to time, a child to just go missing. And basically what happens to certain children, they tend to have trauma at home. That seems to be kind of a connection that we notice between them. But all of a sudden there will be a doorway that opens up for them. They go through it and all of a sudden they're in this other world. All the worlds are different. There's kind of like a compass of different like variations on what the world can be like. But every world is different. And the kids go in there, and while they're in the world, they're literally missing from like real life. Like it's not like there's a time warp and people don't notice they're missing. Like no, people notice they're missing. They're gone for like a year or 2 years or whatever. Something always happens. Oh, and while they're in this world, it is like they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel loved, they feel all these feelings they've never felt before, right? They don't want to go back. They feel so home and so at home and so welcome in this world. But something happens and they go back to the real world. Well, in the real world, they're back with their parents. Weird, but okay. They're telling their parents about this amazing life that they had while they're in this other world. They obviously sound absolutely crazy to their parents, and their parents just want their old kid back. But number one, it's been years. And number two, their kid has experienced adventures that they can never, ever have in the real world. So it's not working. So oftentimes these parents will consult and contact this one woman who basically has this boarding school for, it doesn't say. I think these are called the Wayward Children series, perhaps. Anyway, for kids like these that have walked through doors. And she talks to the headmistress, talks to the parents, and is like, yes, I'm so sorry for what has happened. I will save your child, blah, blah, blah. When in actuality, this woman has her own doorway. She is also one of these children and gets them. And so these kids go to this boarding school, which normally has like kind of a evil connotation, but it actually is a really good place for them, and they have somebody taking care of them that knows them and loves them and sees them for who they are and really wants to help them as well, possibly make it back to the world that they are most interested in joining, or in trying to figure out how to live life here a bit better. So this is the first book. It is a bit of a murder mystery because all of a sudden kids at the school are being killed, and you have to kind of figure out what happens while also kind of discovering more about this whole situation with the kids and their doors and all this sort of stuff. I have read 3 of the books. I think there are loads more. Each one rotates perspectives to different characters. Some of them take place at the boarding school, others take place in a world. But it just has so much to do with trauma, with acceptance, with identity, and with all these beautiful things that, like, even though this was like a magical world, I felt connected to some of the themes and ideas that were discussed in it. I am really shocked that the next one is one of my favorites. It is a horror novel. And I guess when I think about this book club that I participate in with Dee Dee, called the Read Soul Lit Book Club, when I think about everything that I've read throughout the year with them, and sometimes the month gets away from me and I don't read what we're supposed to read. That happens a lot with book clubs with me. But when I think about like all the like amazing like literary fiction and all this stuff that we have read, this is actually my favorite. And that is Lone Women by Victor Levallier. I think that's how you say his name. Anyway, I've read other stuff by him, and I think that I will read whatever he writes. This book talks about this woman that basically leaves town with only a suitcase, and it seems, well, I think it's a trunk, and it's just like massively heavy, and she just moves off to this cabin in the middle of nowhere. She is not by anybody, really. And yeah, there's this weird obsession with this trunk with all her belongings in it, and how it's so massively heavy, and she's so like protective of it, even though, yeah, it's her stuff, okay, but it's bizarre how heavy it is, and also it's bizarre how protective she is of it. Anyway, basically weird stuff happens. This book also involves trauma, and there's a lot more I want to say about it, but I feel like it's up to interpretation, and also it kind of gives away kind of a lot, I think. I don't remember if I did a separate video on this or not, but it profoundly impacted me, and it was just so weird to bring this book to therapy and to tell my therapist like all the things in it that like hit me, that stuck with me. Meanwhile, we're talking about a horror book. Yeah, it was really beautiful, I have to be honest. Okay, then 2 more books. And I think as we go up the list, it seems to be the higher we go on the list, the more I've journaled about these books, and the more I've actually talked about them in therapy. So this is the next one, and it is The Offing by Benjamin Myers. I am also a huge Benjamin Myers fan. I've only read 2 books of his, but I have decided that I love him forever. This book is like kind of nature writing and kind of literary fiction, which is like the perfect combo. This talks about this guy. He's like a young adult. I think he's just come from World War II, just kidding. World War II has kind of just ended. This guy, he basically knows that he's gonna have to start life now that World War II is over as a coal miner. His family has done that for years. It's just not what he's into. But it's just kind of like he doesn't really feel the autonomy to make a different choice. And I don't even know if he's aware that there are other choices. Like, it's just like, well, this is what my life is. But before he settles down to doing what he knows he has to do, being a coal miner, he decides that he's going to kind of travel around. I think it's in England, the English countryside. And along the way, he finds this woman who is so eccentric and so amazing, and she like invites him in for a cup of tea, and he just like builds this relationship with her and ends up staying a lot longer than he thought. And I just love the connection between like this older woman and this younger man, and how their friendship develops and how they both impact each other beautifully, like mutually, like both impacting the other, rather than just the older woman impacting the man, or just the man impacting the older woman. And you just discover so much about the woman, especially as the book goes on. And then there's just obviously like all the nature that's so beautiful, and like I think the characters in the book feel this deep connection to nature, which is also something that I feel as well. And yeah, I just loved it. I felt like it got to like a really deep, like soul level of connection, and I love books like that. And it also has like loads of quotes and stuff that I've written down. Okay. My favorite book of the entire year. This is a book that I read in March. Nope, just kidding. I read it in April. I read it about a month after I started therapy, and it impacted me so much then, and it has stuck with me 5,000%. So that is A Flat Place by Noreen Mas. I think I said her name before. I said Masood, and I think it's Masood, actually. But anyway, it's A Flat Place. This is the British cover, which the majority of these are British covers and are far superior, if I do say so myself, even though I'm not British, so that didn't really make any sense. This is a memoir. I love memoirs. I love books of essays. I love literary fiction. I love nature writing, okay? This is a lot of that. It is nature writing, and it is a memoir. This tells the story of our author from when she is a child in Pakistan, and she is growing up in a deeply traumatic, super abusive situation. However, that's all she knows, and so she doesn't really realize how bad things are. But to get comfort while all this really bad stuff is happening to her, she just feels called to nature, and she feels called especially to flat places. There's something about the flat place that just like the land opening up around her, being able to see forever in the distance, it just like fills her with some kind of feelings that really provide her with a sense of awe and comfort. And you hear about that, and you hear about her childhood, and then it goes to when she's 30 and she is in the UK, I'm pretty sure, and she finally has like a stable job and the ability to get therapy. And it talks about that process and discovering that she has CPTSD, and just like processing through like what has happened to her, how that impacts her now. And what I really liked about this book was just how honest it was, that like things are not perfect at the end. Like, she's not like healed, okay? Stuff has happened to her and has shaped her. And it's a beautiful discovery of how things have shaped her without tying it up into a neat little bow at the end. Book packages. Sorry, I had to get the door because book mail arrived. Anyway, those are my top 10 of the year. I'm curious what your top 10 were. If you made a video, I'm sure I've either already watched it or it's in my watch later list. But if you think I have not watched it, or I don't have it in my watch later list, let me know, because I would love, love, love to watch it. These are literally my favorite videos of the entire year. Also, if you don't have a channel, number one, it's a new year. Maybe you should start one. Okay. And number two, you could also just leave me like your top few favorites in the comments below. That would be amazing. Add me on Storygraph if you want to be friends and follow each other throughout the year. And I hope you all have an absolutely amazing start to reading and just life in general for 2025. Bye, guys.